Bonowitz, and we have found ourselves at Karen's house here in Austin, Texas, where this weekend we decided to organize an action here in Austin around the execution of Quintin Jones, which we'll talk a bit about. And then today, Wednesday, we are going to travel to the prison where Quintin Jones has been housed for the last 21 years.
Actually, he's been housed in Livingston. He'll be killed at the Walls unit. They transfer the prisoner to a different place where they do the killing.
So he's been in prison for 21 years, something like that, in solitary confinement for almost all of that, and is going to be killed. And like millions of other people around the country, we are trying to raise our voices about executions and the immoral actions of our government. And so all of us, normally on Wednesdays here on the Common Good podcast, we have our four faith leaders. Normally it's Stephanie and Laura, Dominique, and myself. Well, we've replaced ourselves with another group of faith leaders. So Karen has done organizing, Catholic organizing around the death penalty around the world. Abe Bonowitz leads Death Penalty Action, a national organization around the death penalty. Shane Claiborne is an activist and organizer and future saint. And so here we find ourselves, and we want to talk about why we're here and how we organize and why we organize. Yesterday was sort of remarkable to me, that on such short notice at the Capitol here in Austin,
pouring rain,
a bunch of people showed up, and they showed up anyway. And to do something that a lot of people asked, I don't know if you all have heard this, was, do you think it's going to do any good? Like, this is a really big question about organizing protests. People asking, does it work? Will you be able to stop the execution? Can we just talk a little bit about that? Like, why organize and why pull people together? Why travel down here or go over to Houston and raise these voices? What do each of you see as what we're doing when we're organizing people around this cause or any other causes?
Can I just start by saying I'm sharing this, and
he's not
texting his you're all encouraged to do is just share this feed on your own Facebook or wherever you're watching it, share it, and let other people know that they can see this. Often the night before a trip, when just like, why am I doing this and what's the point, and oh my God, what a stretch this is. I mean, I went to Reno before I came to Austin, right? And all of this on a very short notice. Thank God for Southwest Airlines frequent flyer miles, but and we accept donations of those, by the way. My first round number execution was the number 400, Flint Gregory Hunt being killed in Baltimore, standing outside the prison. It's the first round number I can remember. A bunch of us were arrested on the 500th, another on the 1000th execution.
So just to be clear, you're saying you have been a part of raising awareness and actions for
over 30 years now.
For 1,000 executions.
No, actually, my first round number was the 400.
Yes.
We're now looking at, if it happens today, it'll be the 1,533rd execution in the current era of the death penalty, which was post-1972. And the point is that there's a lot of dead bodies on the road to abolition.
Yeah.
Okay. And there are many of these names where there were no protests or very little protest, especially in Texas, where it takes a lot out of you when they're doing 2 or 3 a month, which it hasn't been that way for a few years. But when we were organizing here in 1998, for example, every week there were 2 or 3 sometimes. And going and standing vigil, the lawyers stop executions. Public pressure helps change policy. But part of what we're doing is raising awareness and using what I would call teachable moment executions, where there's something special happening. It turns out there's something special about the case that people should be concerned about in every single one of these cases. This one in particular, we scrambled and mobilized because it's the first execution in over 9 months, the first state execution in over 9 months. And this idea that we have to resume executions when clearly we've been able to live perfectly fine without any for 9 months that's a teachable moment. That's a thing that we get to raise up. Okay. In addition to all of the other issues that we can talk about with this particular case, that's why we have to stand up every time. And when there's something special about it, why we have to mobilize and do extra things.
Yeah.
And why it's hard in Texas to pull people out. And I too was both a little bit dismayed and delighted yesterday, because we didn't see any of the usual suspects that with the exception of Karen and Walter Long, there was nobody else I knew, even though I know dozens of people personally here in Austin who are abolitionists who come out to these sorts of things. But many, many people that I didn't know who have a whole different reach. Thanks to you guys for pulling them out. That's what it's all about. It's just building our movement, being present, being open to whoever can come. It's one of the reasons why on this trip I'm passing out free t-shirts and signs and whatever people can take, because it's in demonstrating who you are. You're wearing it on your sleeve, literally, that you start the conversations and find out who else is with us.
So Abe, you have started an organization around all of this to organize people. Karen, tell us what you've done. You've also organized and put life work and energy for years into organizing people. Talk about why you do that. And
well, I'm a Texan, and from Harris County, which has executed more people than most countries and any other state, just even from the county. And so it was, as Abe said, it was a regular occurrence, but it was under the radar. And so no one ever really talked about it. It was just in the air. It was just kind of a part. And so calling it to attention, and that this is not normal, we shouldn't be killing people. And I was part of starting, it's called Catholic Mobilizing Network. And we initiated it because in 2005, the Catholic bishops launched a campaign to end the use of the death penalty nationally in the US. And so Catholic Mobilizing Network basically took that campaign and implemented it. And so our goal is to educate Catholics on the church's teachings, because unfortunately Catholics, lined up on the same realm as the general population as far as their belief in the death penalty, and connecting it and really just taking the message and moving it to the, there's so many facts that lead against deterrence, all of these, the logical reasons. But for some reason, the death penalty has such a visceral reaction to people that we wanted to take it to the moral high ground. And let's talk about the dignity of life, the church's teaching, the right of each person. We have means to protect society in this country, so that's not an issue. It's really why it's a vengeance issue. And so getting people to just take the time to self-reflect. Why am I so passionate about this? Why do I believe that someone has to pay when I want forgiveness, when I do something that is horrific or heinous or harmful?
Yeah.
And so it was really just opening it up, having the discussion, but meeting people where they are in the journey, because this is a touchy issue, and then just walking with them and hopefully leading them towards towards the gospel message of forgiveness and redemption.
That's right. One more thing on this, I think why it's important that we're here in Texas is because, I thought there's that old line that says, sometimes I speak out to change the world, and other times I speak out to keep the world from changing me.
I didn't know that line. That's a good line.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it might be Eli Wiesel or something. No. But I think that there's a part of this that is, you're trying to dance between being effective and just being faithful and being able to sleep, And I mean, when we started looking at this, we thought, well, we've been in a pandemic. We can probably get to Texas. And I think the important thing is, like, when they're talking about the 1990s, I just looked at it. We had 98 executions in 1 year. 98, almost 100 executions. So we've got 5 this year right now scheduled, and they're all in Texas. So I think that's where we started thinking we can actually begin to really focus on each one of these and bring attention to it, because no one should die without someone noticing and raising their voice. But when there's 100 people in a year, it's really daunting. So I think we can really do something on it.
Yeah, that is interesting, because it used to be when there were more executions happening, people would say, well, this doesn't get a lot of attention because there's so many. Now that there's less, and even Quintin Jones' execution schedule for today, people say things like, well, this doesn't get a lot of attention because there's not that many.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like there's this strange thing happening where it feels like people don't want to pay attention to this issue. And it will either be because it's so frequent or because it's so infrequent. What do you think it is about, and I think it's true of many social causes, that leads people to not want to talk about it, to like all of us, right? Because we are doing this so aggressively. We're running into people and someone's saying, well, what are you doing in Texas? Or what are you doing tomorrow? And you say, well, I'm going to do this action. And I don't know. I feel it. I ran into, I sat next to a stranger last night at a restaurant and this came up and he immediately wanted to pivot away, like, oh, wow, I didn't know that was happening. So what do you do for work? Like just doesn't want to engage in it. That feels like an important part of advocacy, right? Is getting people to not pay attention to things they don't want to pay attention to. Do you feel that way?
Well, it's another reason why it's kind of funny because you had to tell me to go get my branding on. I was wearing a non-death penalty shirt, but a lot of times people just see the shirt and look away, not even react. But it's that branding, that imprinting on people's minds that wait, this is something we have to be aware is happening in our state, in our country, in our names. So it's pushing on people. But I'll tell you, I woke up this morning and I'm looking. I'm a subscriber to the Houston Chronicle, and I get a daily feed of what's in their news, and it was not a word in the Houston Chronicle.
And that matters for people because where this execution is going to happen is
just
in
north
of
Houston. Houston is like the big paper of record. Usually it's the regular. It's the Huntsville item that has a reporter at every single execution, and also usually the Associated Press or somebody. But the Houston, because so many executions, they tend to cover it when the murder happened in a community that's in the Houston area, right? But I was just a little bit surprised that it didn't make. I'm sure it's in the paper somewhere. I'm sure it's on their webpage somewhere, but it didn't make the daily feed because it's just business as usual.
Yeah.
But to answer what you're bringing up, is that we've coming off of the pandemic. We've had time. People have had some solitude, some time to reflect that they haven't had in the past, and especially with Black Lives Matter coming to the forefront, and then with the 13 executions scheduled by Trump, the federal, that was just like a blaring. I mean, why? Senseless in the midst of all the other dying that we would, as a country, purposefully kill someone, and especially in horrific instances where we were going to be spreading COVID. I mean, it made no sense. So it was like, it's making people really think about this is just not working. And the other piece to it is, which I'm hopeful, is that by bringing this to light, it's making people face when within ourselves, we've got to make things whole as far as the inconsistencies that we have. We're very, very pro-life as a country. I mean, we say we are. We're all for dignity of everybody has rights, but then it's only certain people. And the race, this focus on and seeing that only certain people in our society have rights. Yeah. It's shining a light also of those in the prison system, of the system as a whole, but especially those on death row, the lack of rights.
I know. My own opinion about this is it shouldn't matter what someone did. I mean, Shane, you have a line you used yesterday. I think it'd be good for you to share today. People might really connect with it around that issue. But I don't think it's just about what did the person do. But to a lot of people, that's their, like they feel like the criminal justice system needs to have a punishment that is outside the norm for behavior that's outside the norm. Mm-hmm. So normally we don't kill people, but normally people don't do such heinous things. We need a response that matches that.
It's the gut reaction. I used to support the death penalty. It was my first reaction when I was confronted with this issue in a meeting that I went to. I didn't expect somebody to be talking about the death penalty. I said an eye for an eye, and I'll pull the switch myself because this is the United States, and we have the best justice system in the world. Of course, how much I did not know. And trying to prove the anti-death penalty people wrong, I found out that everything I believed about it, the truth was the opposite. Okay, so, and that's where people are coming from, is a gut reaction. And it's a perfect example I'll share with you. Idaho had a week or two ago set an execution date for June 2nd for Gerald Pizzuto, a man who did an awful, awful crime. But now, 20 years later, is in hospice care. He may die before even June 2nd. But we did some mobilizing around that. And one of the things that we did was we put some advertising on Facebook in Idaho about this with the thou shalt not kill message, right? And I'm looking at the comments, and people actually took time to go and find what he did and then post this into the comments. This guy did this. Of course, he needs to be killed. That's a very friendly way of saying what some of them said. But the point is that people have a natural gut reaction about what somebody did and what they deserve. And our challenge is getting past that gut reaction to, okay, now what is the system really? How much money do we spend to keep this guy alive while we follow the Constitution and make sure that we have due process, okay? Because you can't have due process in a couple of years. We don't just take him out back and shoot him right after the trial, which is another gut reaction I had. I remember when I was 13, I was watching the news with my dad. There was an article, a news item back when people watched TV and TV news, about a guy who had just been sentenced to death, and then they come back to the anchor desk, and the anchor man says, "And of course, it'll be years before he gets executed." And I remember saying to my dad, "That's wrong. They should take him out and shoot him in the morning." Again, gut reaction, and thankfully, my dad says, we had a conversation, and we started. He helped me see. Wait a minute, how do we know? And are we following the letter of the law? And this is the key thing that people need to understand. Of all the people who commit murder, where we catch them, which is only about half the time, where they're death eligible, which is a much smaller number of people. Not every murder is eligible to be punished by an execution. Of the death eligible people, we only seek a death sentence in a smaller percentage of those people. And where we seek it, we only get a death sentence in a tiny percentage of them. And where we get a death sentence, about half of all death sentences are overturned during the appeals process. So it boils down to fewer than 1% of the people who are death eligible ending up with a death sentence and staying on death row to the point of execution. And if that's the reaction of our society, is kill 1% of the people who could be killed, then we have to really start asking why this one and not these others. And when we look at the 4 words that are carved into the face of the U.S. Supreme Court building, which are equal justice under law, if that's the bedrock foundation of our legal system, we don't have it. Because for every one we execute, we can look at 10 or 15 more or 99 more that have a different story that oftentimes sounds much worse. Every murder is awful. And that's the other thing, and then I'll stop, is often politicians will say, we need this for the victim family. Of course, in the case of Quintin Jones, it's his family where the murderer and the murderer are in the same family, and the family doesn't want this execution. But even if you do, what makes your loved one more valuable than 99% of the others? Than all the others. Why this one and not these others? And really turning it around, it's actually a death sentence of a different kind. When you've got the killer of your loved one on death row, it means that you're waking up every day saying, what do I have to do to get this done, to see this guy killed so I can begin my life again? When there's a life sentence, you can begin your healing process. 1 or 2 years after the trial's over, you're done. And you're never going to get your loved one back. There's always that empty chair at the table. So all this is to say, we have a system that treats people differently and creates so much more damage. Yeah. And that's why we need to get rid of it. I consider us as death penalty abolitionists to be victims' rights advocates. We need to do better for homicide survivors. In Ohio, for example, we have a domestic violence survivors network. We have a rape survivors network. We don't have a homicide survivors network. We need that too. Yeah.
Karen, you've obviously dealt with that question. How do we does our judicial system need to have a over-the-top response for over-the-top crimes? How do you think about it?
Well, I mean, really to piggyback off of what Abe was talking about, that, unfortunately, when you see who we're executing, it is, as Shane, you spoke so eloquently yesterday about, as far as it's the poor, it's the underrepresented. And, this is not what our country is supposed to be built on. It's not our fabric for that. And the other is, yes, it is over the top, but I want to just call to mind today, because it's weighs heavy on me. If you've ever been present or sat with a family in the wide rippling effect that the death penalty has, it's just not that one person that suffers. Mm-hmm. It's all of their network, all the people that love them, the person that's being killed, also those that love the victim's family members, the victim family members. If you've sat with a family in Huntsville, I have never experienced a longer day in my life than I sat with my son. His pen pal was being executed, and sitting with that family and watching the pain of every minute throughout the day and anticipating. It is just surreal. Can you imagine? I mean, it's like death is a normal process, and we can all just let that go as far as if we see them passing in a natural way. But it is so surreal to see somebody that's healthy and vibrant, and then in a minute know that in a few minutes they're going to be dead. And it's just, and they're in their fullness of life, and they're still a productive person. It's just not who we are called to be as a people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, what we'll see today, if it goes forward, is exactly what Karen said. It is a ritual of death, and like in the church, we have liturgy, and there's this really dark liturgy of death where you're contained on death watch. You have your last meal, you get your final words. Then we try to sanitize this whole process of killing someone, and you look at as Christians, you look at our faith and you see all those things that we call the stages of the cross. Like there's this that Jesus is exposing that whole system of killing in order to show us another way, but we're still doing it. And I think that what I also heard Karen saying too is that you sit around, someone's eating beside Abe, and there you go, hey, I don't really like to talk politics or whatever. Proximity makes all the difference, and I remember I was telling Karen last night, there was a Texas pastor that, didn't really have strong opinions on it, but there was someone that came to our church and said, I just want to know how you feel on the death penalty. And she said, well, I'm for it, and she said, well, my son is getting ready to get executed here in Texas, and I just needed a pastor. And this pastor said, well, listen, I'm a pastor first above anything. I'll put all that aside. And she walked with her. And as she walked with this woman, as her son was executed, she said, there is nothing that allows you to walk away from that without a very strong feeling that what we're doing is straight up evil. And she said our whole congregation was discipled and mentored through the process of watching this mother's child killed. And she said, the thing that I will never forget, she says, is when this mother touched her son for the first time after he was executed. They weren't allowed contact visits. So the first time she could kiss his cheek or hold his hand was after the state of Texas executed him. But those are things that we just don't know,
That's the thing. There was another story that came out of yesterday about the other ripple and another part of the ripples of the execution. And that's from, was it Reverend Zach? He told a story about his grandfather, his grandfather, right? That was an executioner here in Texas. And was it his grandfather or his great-grandfather?
His great-grandfather, I think.
Yeah. But he was sharing how this had, it was generational. They talk about this with Holocaust victims. It's in your DNA, and you have to exercise it out. And he talked about that impacting his family and how finally it was his mother who helped them reshape how they're thinking. And and that's something we often don't think about, is what's the trauma that we're asking the prison workers to take on when they take a normally healthy person and kill them. By the way, just to circle back on that Idaho thing, that was one of the arguments we were making there, because they're going to take a guy who's on hospice care and execute him.
Yeah.
Well, the good news is that yesterday, and thanks to everybody who signed a petition about this, and petition signing is important. Yesterday, our petition in Idaho was delivered directly to the Board of Pardons and Paroles there. They were meeting to decide whether or not to give him a hearing, a clemency hearing. And they voted to give him a clemency hearing and set it for November. So he's got to stay. That execution is not going to happen on June 2nd. It's entirely likely he'll die before he gets there to that hearing. But the point is that they heard the message, and that everybody taking action made a difference.
Yeah, and that's one of the powerful parts of this. And you had this great line yesterday that was something like, it's not a question of does the person deserve to die? It's the question, do we deserve to kill?
Yeah, I think that might be a Sister Helen line or a Brian Steve. You exchange these, but it's because it's true. I think it resonates, right? And that's exactly the question Jesus raises, right? Like, let the one who's without sin cast the first stone. Like this job of sorting out people's sins is God's, not ours. And especially when we have systems that are so broken and we get it wrong over and over and over.
And the death penalty is a particularly violent and broken system, but it really does call into judgment the rest of our criminal punishment system. Like, once you pull back on the death penalty and say we should not kill someone, well, I would also say we should not put someone in solitary confinement for 20 years, for 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. We should not imprison people in dangerous environments, knowing that our prisons are dangerous. And when they're sent to that prison, we say, well, you're being sent to Angola, so take that. To that kind of, like, the whole judicial system is built around a perverse punishment narrative, and it's state-sponsored and state-funded cruelty and punishment. And I feel like that's partly what keeps people away from the death penalty. They know that once you pull the plug from the death penalty, you're going to start asking questions about a whole lot of other parts of the system. And that's what we're not comfortable with, right? We don't want to. Even this person I ran into yesterday, I was using as an anecdote, when this came up, and then we talked about, because I said I'm from Minneapolis, and he said, how are things there with the police and George Floyd's murder? And he quickly came around to, I know all of the failures are true, but this is still the best country in the world. Like, somewhere a critique of the punishment system, the police system, somehow became a critique of America and a critique of, are we a good people? And the need for us to believe as a nation that we are good people, I think, is what keeps so much of this stuff locked into place. We won't admit that so much of our state-sponsored
nobody wants to be in
violence.
the company of Saudi Arabia and Yemen and China and Iran when it comes to this.
And we imprison more people. We're more cruel to more people in our prison systems, and the whole. Does the back of your shirt, is that the one that has the list?
I think so.
I thought that's a very, very powerful. People probably can't read it on the stream and then obviously on the podcast, but it says stop state violence, and then it has bullet points. Not a lot of t-shirts have bullet points, but this one does. Stop state violence, no death penalty, no extrajudicial executions, which we could talk about, no police killings, no mass incarceration, deathpenaltyaction.org. A lot of people see those as discrete issues, but really, in a lot of ways, this incarceration narrative in this country is what's being called to.
Well, this is the t-shirt and the message that we found ourselves shifting to in the wake of the George Floyd murder. It wasn't because of that, but that became sort of a flashpoint for the whole country. But also, we had already been thinking, how do we talk about these police killings? And actually, the way we talk about them is as what they are, extrajudicial executions, which is an international vernacular. It's what they call them when a government official decides to be judge, jury, and executioner, and they take somebody and kill them without putting them through a legal process, because it's so much easier and quicker, and it's a way to, and especially in other countries, it's a way to dispatch people that are against the government or whatever. But here it's a way to just dispatch the people that are undesirable and lesser in the eyes of whoever that authority figure is. And that tends to be Black people, brown people, poor people. anybody that is, if you come into the sights of somebody with a gun who has a badge too, suddenly they can find a way to justifiably kill you within the law.
Yeah.
And that's the miracle of cameras on police and other people with cameras. Peter Gabriel, more than 2 decades ago, when I was on the board of Amnesty International USA, Peter Gabriel was
The musician?
was buying the musician.
Okay.
Right.
This is awesome. Where's this going?
Sorry, this is for those of us of our
I
generation.
thought you were going to give a Peter Gabriel quote here.
There was an organization that was literally buying video cameras.
Yeah.
Because he used to not have this was in a time when people didn't carry around phones that had, you didn't have cell phones, right? They were buying video cameras and putting them in the hands of people who were working for justice in their countries, so that they could capture the footage of these abuses happening and then somehow get that out so people could see it. Because once you could put...
Yeah.
We did that in Philly. It was called Little Brothers Watching You.
Really?
The big brother watching you.
Yeah. You gave cameras to people.
Hey, Peter got them for
And
us,
it used to be illegal to record police in some
They're
jurisdictions.
still trying to make it that way.
That
right?
you cannot record a police officer in the action of their duty, because that's somehow interfering with their duty, trying to prevent us from knowing
what we're
what's going on.
seeing. See, here we are going way beyond the issue of the death penalty to our criminal legal system, right? And everything is the whole point of you can't videotape a police officer doing their duty in public is because we don't want to have to hold them accountable.
Yeah.
It's super hard not to justify not holding up. Like they just decided not to prosecute the sheriffs that killed Mr. Brown in North Carolina. I don't even know if that one's on videotape, but we know that here's a guy that was being served a warrant, decided to run, and they took that as permission to shoot him. Oh, wait, I do want to correct that. If I read it correctly, and it's correct reporting, he pointed his car towards them as if he was going to run at them, and that was enough for them to shoot him. It's not, you can't just step out of the way, you got to kill him. And
real quick, just to go back to your shirt again, every time I look at this shirt, I think of this line from one of the early Christian thinkers, Cyprian, and he said, he's kind of pondering this way that we justify state violence, and so he says, we call it evil when an individual kills another individual, as we should. He says, but why do we sanctify it and call it good when the state does it in mass? It's wrong to kill, whether it's a criminal or a governor. It helped that the early church recognize Jesus as one who was executed by the state, you know. But that calling out of the violence of the empire they were in. They were really, really consistent on that.
Yeah, and what that tends to do, and I've heard people make this argument, and this is why I think people get nervous. So, in fact, we were with Susan Bossler, and I remember her saying, it doesn't make sense to kill people to show people that killing people is wrong.
Yeah.
Right? She was one of the first people I heard say that. We were zip-tied next to each other being arrested.
Suzanne Bossler is she watched her father being stabbed to death, and she herself was stabbed and left for dead. And then she turned around and worked. Her father was a pastor. They were killed in the parsonage, and he was killed. She was left for dead. And then she worked to get James Bernard Campbell's death sentence overturned and changed to life in prison. And she had to hire a lawyer to have her own voice in the court.
Right, for her to even be heard.
That's right. And they said, you can't say anything about the death penalty. So her workaround was when she had her lawyer ask her, well, what's your name? Where do you live? What do you do for a living? And she said, I'm a hairdresser and I work to abolish the death penalty.
Yeah.
And that's how she got around it and conveyed to the jury what she wanted.
And I've heard people take that argument. It's wrong to kill people to show that killing people is wrong. That just takes you to the next step. Like, it's wrong to incarcerate people to show that kidnapping someone is wrong. Like, at some point, that argument shines a light on what can we do to one another in our society.
Yeah.
That's the really larger question here, right? That we don't have a good answer for a righteous way, because the United States of America, I'll be preachy for a second, has not done its work to figure out how we respond to people who behave in ways that are dangerous or culturally abhorrent.
Amen. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
I think you should say a little on this, because the Pope's he's been speaking out, not just about the death penalty, though he's been doing that wonderfully, but also about
Restorative.
Restorative justice. Yep.
Well, it's in this country, we have an adversarial court system as far as it's really who's got the best lawyer, wins the best. It's not about based on truth any longer.
Mm-hmm.
And what we need to is, we believe we're the best country, but we need to learn from our other fellow countries that are doing restorative processes for their judicial systems. And then they don't have the recidivism rates that we do.
Right.
I mean, in this country, we institutionalize people. And so when they come out, unfortunately, we don't have systems to receive them. And consequently, the only means for them is to do some other act of violence or harm to be put back in to be able to survive. And it's just, the whole system is backwards. We should be focused on how do we restore people, or how do we address the harm that was committed, and how do we reconcile that versus, what's the crime and what's the punishment, and totally oblivious to the brokenness. So a restorative process would be addressing the person, what was done, who was harmed, and how can we prevent it. The perpetrator is at the end, how do we address their issues, that why they did the crime in the first place. It's more of a holistic approach that we have to turn.
Yes.
And I think this is definitely what Pope Francis has seen and is calling for, as far as that we need to, our whole goal is community. We are supposed to live in community, and how do we restore the community, and how do we restore those that have done harm back into the community?
And we live in a meritocracy, right? Which is a funny word that is very academic, but it means a society built around merit, or what is deserved.
Mm-hmm.
And we tell ourselves a story that people get what they deserve. So if you're wealthy, you worked hard. If you're poor, you probably did something wrong. If you do a crime, you have to be willing to do the time. There's this myth of merit, and I think it's perpetuated not only by an American narrative, but the religious narratives that are predominant in the United States, especially Christian, Muslim, and Jewish faiths, have been appropriated into a merit-based system where somehow there's something to be earned and something to be worked for, and those stories have been utilized to keep up all of this. And I think this is why we struggle in our country, and we struggle with one another, and we struggle in our families, and we just don't like people to get something for nothing or not get what they deserve.
Yeah. Well, I think it needs to be said that there are people that are eminently dangerous. I think Dylan Roof is unrepentant, eminently dangerous at this point. But especially as Christians, we always hold out hope that someone can change. I mean, we're all testimonies that we can be made new, right? That we can be born again. That's what we believe. And so those voices like Sharon Risher, our friend whose mother was killed in the Emmanuel Church shooting, she doesn't want Dylan Roof killed. Like she says, he doesn't need to be killed. He needs to know Jesus. He needs grace. He needs to understand the power of hatred and racism and the power of love over it, and so she doesn't, they've been one of the most adamant voices against his execution. But it's important, I think, for a lot of folks, they see these horrific crimes. You go, no one's saying that crime should go without consequences, but that the ultimate goal of any way that we deal with a crime is that it's meant to restore, it's meant to heal the victims, but also to leave the possibility that someone who's done something terrible can also be changed, right? And in the case of Quintin Jones today, that brings us together. I mean, this is that exact case that 20 years later, he's a very different person than he was as a drug addicted young person coming out of a lot of pain, right? And did something that he himself wanted to kill himself over. He said he thought he deserved to die. And over the last, 20 years, he's seen his own dignity. He's felt mercy from his family, the family of the victim. And I mean, in his own line, like, when I was a child, I thought like a child, and now I'm a man, I think like a man. I've abandoned childish things. He says, if they execute me, they're executing the child that I was 20 years ago, not the person I am today. And boy, if that doesn't sound like a case that should be, if anyone believes the system works like Quintin Jones, they should be a big advocate that he not be killed.
Well, that is the argument that could be made in almost every single one of these cases. We're not killing the person that committed the crime, right? But we don't necessarily have to. And I know we're going to need to wind it down here. I want to make sure you put the graphic back up. I see that you put the graphic back up. Thank you very much.
We got a producer.
So that people can know.
Producer Dan.
You can go to deathpenaltyaction.org and just click on take action, state executions, and that's where you can find a petition you can still sign. And we're sending that over to the governor's office. We're going to actually go walk in to the governor's office.
In just a matter of minutes,
today.
We're going to go back over and try to catch the governor of Texas.
We didn't manage to get into his home last night, so we'll go to the office.
Yeah, we stood
we were
outside
hoping for dinner and little
we
conversation.
did stand outside his house in the rain and asked his security.
If you haven't seen the live stream from last night, you can go back and look. It's a little bit jarring to have been the person to get confronted by the state police, but not the first time. And but anyway, but seriously, today there's two petitions for certiorari before the U.S. Supreme Court asking that if they will take the case or order a lower court to look at more of the case issues. One of the issues is whether he has a right to have the evidence heard that there was some disparity in his clemency process. And actually, I may be getting that wrong. I shouldn't. There's two issues before the U.S. Supreme Court. It could come down to 6 o'clock before we know. But 6 o'clock Central Time is the execution time. There's also the fact that the governor, here in Texas, there's the Texas Board of Pardons and Parolles. And with regard to executions, it's set up as a buffer to the governor. If they don't make a recommendation for clemency, the governor's hands are tied, except that he has the power unilaterally, he or she has the power to unilaterally issue a 30-day reprieve. And that's the request that we're asking now, is for people to call the governor. I think the phone number on that graphic. If not, we'll find it on social media. Just hashtag save Quinn
they can look it up.
Hashtag Quinn.
You can try to call the governor, as we did yesterday.
Yes.
You get a voicemail that tells you no one can answer your call right now. Go online and
on our petition,
we need to overwhelm them with people caring about this.
We need to make sure. So the point is, that the governor can issue a reprieve, and we need to ask him to do that. And then the governor appoints this Texas Board of Pardons and Parolles. So he appoints the members, and he can say to them, "Hey, I want you to reconsider." I don't know if there's actually a legal precedent for that, but you know what? If you're an appointee, you can be fired, and people can be put in your place, and you can.
And ultimately, I think as a non-Texan, I guess my opinion about this doesn't matter as much as a Texan, Karen. Texas could use a different governor. Like if we can't get the governor to act differently, let's just get a different governor.
Amen.
And, there's a process for that called an election, and let's let Greg Abbott let his little light shine, doing something other than bothering the good people of Texas by.
But speaking of the good people of Texas, we had a legislator with us yesterday in the rally who had changed his mind on the death penalty, but things are different in Texas. They passed a bill in the Texas House of Representatives to disallow the law of parties, for example, which means that if you are, you're the getaway driver and didn't even go in the bank, but somebody shot somebody in the bank, everybody gets the same punishment. And we don't know how far that's going to go in the Senate or whether the governor might sign that bill, but the House passed it by an overwhelming vote. It's amazing. So there is change happening, and we can all help make it happen more and faster.
Yeah. Well, all the blessing to Quintin Jones and his family. These moments move between the issues of justice, the issues of a penal punishment system, and also the personal system, the personal time, and all the people that have to be involved in killing Quintin Jones and Quintin Jones' own. Like right now, he is thinking of his final moments of life, and to be staring down, not only that your life will end, but that it will be taken from you by the very country, state, and community that you live in. It is a uniquely painful thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is the definition of premeditated murder.
Murder.
You know, like if this execution goes forward, the cause of death on the death certificate of an executed person is homicide.
And it's done in our name.
So deathpenaltyaction.org, sign a petition, give us all your money, help us do the work.
Sounds like a stick up. There was a stick up from Abe Bonowitz. But thanks all for being a part of this today. If you're in, we will be live streaming the best we can tonight from outside the
Walls
prison,
unit.
outside the unit where this execution will happen. So thank you for being part of the podcast. And we will talk with you again tomorrow.
Or tonight. Thank you.